Buffalo Bird Girl. A HIDATSA story retold by S.D. Nelson. My name is Buffalo Bird Woman. Wahini and my people are known as the HIDATSA. When I was young, they called me Buffalo Bird Girl, after the little brown bird that lives on the prairies of the Great Plains. This name has brought me fortune, for buffalo have a strong heart, and the birds of the air have a good spirit. In my life, I have seen beautiful things, and I have lived through hard times. When I was 6 years old, a terrible sickness called smallpox set upon my people with a fury. The cruel disease first appeared on the Great Plains many years before my birth. It arrived with the coming of the white men. They did not bring the sickness on purpose, but Indians could not fight off this disease. They had no immunity to the dreaded evil spirit. Smallpox passed some by, but sadly it took the lives of many HIDATSA people, including my mother, my brother, and one of my aunts. My grandmother and 2 aunts survived. They raised me with the same love and kindness as my real mother. We lived in a village of earth mound lodges on the highest bluffs of the Missouri River. We called it like a fishhook village, for it was built upon a sharp bend. One side of our settlement was protected by the mighty river. The other side faced the vast open prairie and was fenced off with stout posts, a stockade for protection from enemy tribes. The aggressive Lakota Indians in particular were constantly trying to steal our horses, our supplies of corn, and other belongings. Our village was the home of 2 different Indian tribes, the HIDATSA and the Manda. We had formed an alliance in order to increase our strength in numbers, so we would be less vulnerable to attack. Like a fishhook village was at the center of much activity, with people constantly coming and going. My family's earth mound lodge was large, measuring more than 40 feet in diameter. It needed to be, for it was home to my father, grandmother, brothers and sisters, and cousins and uncles and aunts. 12 people in all. Inside, 4 enormous cottonwood posts stood like trees. They supported timber crossbeams that carried the great weight of packed earth. There was a fire pit in the center with a smoke hole in the roof above. In the shadows beyond the 4 posts were more columns. They held the log rafters and the leaning walls. Various household items and baskets of dried corn and squash hung from poles set across the rafters. Bed frames ranged the interior. Each served as a bed as well as a place to sit. The bedposts were draped with old teepee coverings for privacy. This canopy also kept out drafts at night. Everyone slept on buffalo robes. For 3 seasons of the year, this where we lived, and I constantly ate my permanent home. Here I learned many of the duties except of the HIDATSA woman. Work began early every day. I remember waking to the comforting sound of a crackling morning fire. My grandmother and aunts would already be awake, preparing breakfast. I learned by watching and then by doing. A favorite breakfast for us children was hot corn porridge. To make it, grandmother would pound hard kernels of corn into a fine meal in the wooden mortar. She boiled dried squash and beans in clay pot filled with river water. Then she added the cornmeal mix with roast buffalo fat to the pot of vegetables. It tasted delicious. We women and girls always ate in a separate area from the men and boys. In the spring, when green buds appeared on the gooseberry bushes, we knew the time for planting had arrived. Families from each earth lodge had their own garden. The women and girls did the farming. We planted corn, squash, beans, and sunflowers in rich soil of the lowlands nearby. There were several varieties of corn, yellow, white, and red. We used digging sticks and iron holes to loosen the earth and get rid of weeds. My grandmother used a hoe made of bone from a buffalo shoulder blade attached to a stick. From spring to harvest, my younger sister and I would sit atop a platform, keeping careful watch over our cornfields. Hungry cows, gophers, and horses were a constant threat. They needed to be chased away. Prowling boys from the village liked to sneak among the rows of corn, too, and steal cobs. We would yell their names when we saw them and threaten to tell their mothers. Cornplants had a spirit, as do all living things. Even clouds, stars, and the rocks of the earth are a part of the one great spirit. We girls who kept watch often sang songs to the corn. We sang in the same way a mother sings to her young child. We believed the corn plants enjoyed listening to our songs. The men did the hunting. They sought buffalo, antelope, deer, and other large animals. The boys hunted small animals, such as rabbits and birds, such as grouse and ducks. Removing the hides or skinning was a task we all shared. The women would prepare and cook the fresh meat for everyone to enjoy. They would slice up the remaining meat and dry it on racks outdoors. Rising smoke from a fire helped cure and preserve the meat so it would last a long time. The women also scraped and tanned the animal hides. They used the prepared skins to make clothing and teepees. Like other tribes on the prairies, we needed teepees whenever we traveled. The women even made the bull boats used for river travel, out of bent willow, saplings, and rawhides. All of these things I learned by watching and then doing. Friendly tribes such as the Crow and Shoshone regularly visited our village. They traded horses for our corn. White fur trades came into our country too, seeking animal furs, especially buffalo hides. For these, they would trade us supplies that we desired. They built a trading post near our village and called it Fort Berthold. It was exciting to see steamboats come upriver and unload items to trade. To us, the white man's good, kettles, guns, metal knives, iron hoes, and sugar were wonderful new luxuries. Sometimes I was allowed to go into the fort. There I would see colored glass beads, metal cooking pots, and colored fabric, as well as the different people, missionaries, settlers, gold seekers, and soldiers. Their strange hats and clothing with buttons seemed marvelous. Even the language they spoke while bartering was a curiosity. HIDATSA and Mandan men began hunting buffalo for trade. They killed more than I imagined possible. At the trading post, buffalo hides were heaped in piles like mountains. We received goods such as metal tools, rope, and coffee, and the men were given liquor. We were told that the hides were sent downriver, then back east to be processed into leathered goods. In our farming community, there was often extra time for fun. The boys played games that tested physical skill. They shot arrows, wrestled, and raced horses. We girls were not allowed to play with the boys. Instead, we played houses with dolls, kickball, and my favorite game, hide toss. In hide toss, a group of girls held on to the edges of a large buffalo hide and used it to take turns tossing one another into the air. The goal was to see who could fly the highest while standing and keep her balance the longest. Show-offs would twist from side to side as they bounced in the air, turning a full circle in 2 bounds. I could hardly wait for my turn. I would fly as high as the others and flutter kick my feet. At the height of each bounce, my stomach would feel as if we were turning upside down. We would shriek and laugh until we were exhausted. During the summer season, we picked ripe berries and dug prairie turnips. The gathering of firewood needed to be done year-round. The job was less difficult with the help of our family dogs. My dog's name was Sheepisha, or Blackie. I raised him from a puppy and remember wrapping him in a blanket and carrying him on my back the way a mother carries her baby. When he was old enough and strong enough, he joined the other family dogs in hauling firewood. Just as my grandmother had taught me, I rigged my dog with a harness, 2 long poles, and a cross frame called chores. We had to travel quite some distance with our dogs in order to reach the wooded areas along the river. Men would accompany us to watch for enemies. Once there, we chopped dry tree limbs and driftwood with iron-held hatchets. We tried armloads of firewood on our dog's travois, but never more than a strong dog could pull. Often upon returning, I would reward Sheepisha with an extra chunk of meat. One summer, the Lakota attacked in broad daylight. 30 mounted men came yelping over the ridge. Pooh, 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 they fired their guns. The horseless thieves had come for more than just corn. They wanted slave women and children too. My sister and I shrieked as we ran from our platform in our cornfields. Other women and children ran crying toward the village. A painted Lakota horseman with an eagle-feathered hairdress galloped along the edge of our cornfield. A young HIDATSA guard named Red Hand was ready and charged his horse to meet the enemy. The Lakota launched an arrow into the air. The shaft struck Red Hand's horse in the neck, and it fell beneath him. But brave Red Hand landed on his feet. He raised his rifle, took steady aim, and fired. Immediately, the Lakota brute slumped forward and dropped his bow. His pony turned in retreat. Yelping HIDATSA and Mandan warriors seemed to appear from everywhere to repulse the attack. The Lakota quickly realized they were greatly outnumbered. They had no choice but to flee. Our warriors gave chase. After nightfall, our men returned. They rode into the village triumphant victors with war stories and the scalp of one unfortunate Lakota. As was the custom of our women, built a great fire for the celebration. Everyone painted their faces black and joined the tradition scalp dance. It was a joyous party that lasted late into the night. With the attack behind us, the women and girls had to attend to harvesting the crops. First, we gathered the squash. We sliced each vegetable into sections, pierced them with rods and splits, and hung them on racks in the sun to dry. The corn, which had ripened on the stalks, was ready for harvesting next. Later, we would gather the beans and sunflower seeds. The women and girls from each lodge collected their ears of corns in baskets and heaped them near the center of the individual gardens. There was so much corn that the men and boys would help with the husking. We peeled back the husk and braided the corn together into bundles. Each bundle of braided corn held about 50 ears and was heavy. The bundles were hung on the rails of the framework known as the drying stage. Small ears of husked corn were not braided together. Instead, people carried them in baskets to the drying stage and spreaded them to cure in the sun. The corn had to be completely dry before being placed in storage, otherwise it would spoil. The women and older girls separated the dry kernels from the small loose combs in the process called threshing. The threshing was done in a tent beneath the drying stage. The women beat the corn with sticks, knocking the kernels from the cobs. The walls of the tent kept the flying kernels from bouncing away. Then we gathered the beans and sunflower seeds. After the harvest, in preparation for the next year's crop, the woman set aside plenty of extra ears of corn. The best kernels from these cobs would be the seeds for next spring's planting. We saved the ripest and the best colored seeds from our squash, beans, and sunflowers as well. We hung some of the bundles of braided corn in the family lodge for immediate use. We also kept some sacks of threshold corn, but much of our dried corn, squash, beans was stored in an underground chamber called caches. My grandmother taught me how to use a buffalo shoulder blade like a shovel to hollow out an underground cavity. The pit would be deeper than a man is tall. A ladder was needed to climb in and out. We would line the walls with dry grass and then fill the pit with corn and other dried crops. When the cache was full, the opening was covered with dry grass and hidden beneath dirt. Robbers would have a hard time finding the buried treasure. The contents could be dug up whenever we needed. Some caches were dug into the floor of the lodges, but most were outdoors. And this way, dried corn, beans, and squash lasted through winter. We had plenty to eat when the prairies were covered in snow. As the days grew shorter and the nights turned cold, I could actually smell the change of seasons. The cottonwood trees transformed from green into gold. A successful harvest meant giving thanks to the great spirits and celebrating. On such occasions, I would wear my finest beaded dress. We women and girls would braid our hair and apply makeup to our faces. At night, drumming and singing rose from the village. We all took our turn at dancing, many with painted faces and in handsome costumes. The scene was magnificent. Men and women always danced separately. Likewise, boys and girls did not dance together. Winter on the Great Plains can be merciless. From this reason, my people did not live upon the exposed banks of the Missouri River year-round. The river iced over and remained frozen like rock for months. With the onset of the cold winter months, we vacated like a fish-hook village and moved to the wooded lowlands. Everyone in the village packed up the stores of food and other belongings. We lashed everything in bundles onto travois, which were pulled by horses and dogs. The bottom lamps were thick with trees and offered some protection from the brutal blizzards that hollered across the prairie. There was also better supplies of firewood. Each winter we selected a new location to build our temporary winter lodges. With our food supplies ran low, some of our people would return to like a fishhook village to gather corn and dried vegetables we had buried in the storage caches. This way, we were never hungry. With the end of each winter, the sun traveled higher in the sky and warmed the earth. The thick ice on the Missouri River began to thaw and break up. Migrating geese flew northward in great waves that filled the sky. Their thrilling song assured us that spring was coming. All of the HIDATSA and the Mandan people knew then that it was time to return to like a fishhook village. Our world was constantly changing. Raids from the Waring Lakota tribe continued. Steamboats arrived frequently during the summer, bringing more white men to our village. Another tribe, known as the Arikara, decided they could not survive alone. Smallpox and the Waring Lakota had taken too many of their lives. We welcomed them into like a fishhook village. In spite of the outside pressures, we continued to live closer to our Mother Earth and to follow her ways. We watched and listened for the changing of the seasons. Like a fish hook village is gone now. There are no buffalo left to hunt, and the fur trade ended long ago. The government of the United States said my people had to move from our village. They promised to provide rations of food and clothing if we lived on a reservation. The government built roads, schools, and churches. They told us that our children had to learn to live the white man's way. So we, HIDATSAs, as well as the Mandan and the Arikara people, gave up our round earth lodges and began living in square cabins on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. With the passing of winter, the days grew warm. Green buds appeared on the gooseberry bushes, signaling the arrival of spring and the time for planting. Not far from our square house, there is an open space for garden. The seeds that have been carefully stored through the long winter are brought forth. My old hands can still loosen the earth with a hoe and seek kernels in the black soil. Inside each seed sleeps the spirit of life, waiting to sprout. In my memories of long ago, I hear two girls singing, my sister and I. We are singing to the corn in the same way a loving mother sings to her child. And in the moist earth, unseen, there comes a gentle stirring of a new life. The end.